Good morning, everybody that is joining the webinar. Bear with us just another minute and let the folks still trying to log in get logged in, and we will get started in about 60 seconds. All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Incorporating Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning into Your Revenue Cycle Strategy. If you check out the events section on the Georgia chapter of HFMA's website, you'll see that we publish all activities from Georgia HFMA as well as other chapters in our region. I encourage you to take advantage of the education sessions offered not only at your chapter level, but the region level as well. My name is Matt Fisher, and I'm a volunteer on the Board of Directors over Webinars and Forums for Georgia HFMA. I want to take a second to go over a quick few housekeeping items, and then we'll turn it over to today's presenters and let them go forward with the webinar. All phone lines will be on mute to avoid interruptions during the broadcast. Please use the Q&A box in the Zoom meeting to submit any questions at any time. I'll coordinate with our presenters for their answers towards the end of the presentation. You will receive the presentation recording link, as well as a link for a survey and a CPE credit form within about 48 hours from me. Everybody on today's call is eligible to receive continuing education units for participating, and look out for that information coming from me on Friday. Now I'd like to take a quick second to recognize the Georgia chapter sponsors, whose logo you can see on the screen now. We sincerely appreciate all of their support and everything that they contribute to Georgia HFMA. Now I'll introduce the speakers for today's session. Valerie Barkoff and Dr. Vipin Ramani are the co-founders of Shore. Valerie Barkoff has about 25 years of experience in revenue cycle leadership and transformation in the healthcare industry. Valerie has served as the subject matter expert in the implementation of artificial intelligence for revenue cycle optimization. She holds a Bachelor of Health Sciences from the University of Kentucky and a Master's of Business Administration from the University of Tennessee. Dr. Vipin Ramani has over 3 decades of experience in successful artificial intelligence implementation in the healthcare, financial, and industrial space, including retail, institutional, aerospace, power, and medical areas. Vipin is the author of several papers and patents, and he holds a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering and a PhD in Computer and Electrical Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Valerie and Vipin, we are ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So as Matt said, my name is Valerie Barkoff. I'm going to help be facilitating this presentation and going back and forth with Dr. Ramani. I wanted to cover a little bit about what we're going to do during this presentation today. As Vipin and I were putting together the presentation, we wanted to talk about the difference between robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. We're going to let Vipin really give us some good examples of AI applications of outside the healthcare sector and the applicability back into the revenue cycle. We'll cover a little bit of those areas that we think are ripe for artificial intelligence within the revenue cycle, talk about building your AI strategy for the revenue cycle, and the best practice in choosing a vendor. So this presentation is 100% for you guys. I told Matt, feel free to pepper us with questions. We do have a hard stop at the end of the hour, so we're going to try to get through everything. But please, if you have a question, I would encourage you that this is the opportunity to tap into somebody as brilliant and my good friend, Dr. Ramani. I'm going to give you a quick introduction about what Shore Health is and who we are. It's actually the joint venture of 2 companies. So a lot of you who know me know I'm a principal at Wyndham Brannon, and I lead the healthcare advisory practice there. Dr. Ramani has his own business with Deep Indigo AI, and the 2 companies came together to form a joint venture around Shore. And when we started brainstorming a while back, we realized that we both had the same vision, that we really wanted to transform the business side of healthcare by really bringing these advanced artificial intelligence techniques to the revenue cycle. The goal is not just to make humans more effective, but really to create these autonomous systems that outperform humans. The administrative burdens are increasing every year, and we think are driving up the cost of healthcare and making us highly inefficient. And so we really are committed to bringing innovative solutions that we consider game changing to the healthcare industry. I want to give you just a little bit more about my background and then ask Vipin to cover his, because I think it's always important to understand who your presenters are. So as Matt mentioned, I have over 25 years of healthcare experience in the revenue cycle, but I always tell people it started before that because I worked my way through college as a registration clerk. The first 8 years of my career, I was in the Big Six, helped write the methodology to consult in the revenue cycle for one of the Big Four now. I got into operations and I worked as the executive director of revenue management and contracting for DeKalb Health System. And then I was the vice president of revenue cycle for St. Joseph's Hospital of Atlanta before returning to consulting around 2009. Started getting into the digital employee artificial intelligence space in around 2016. And then Vipin and I recently last year officially formed our partnership. So I'd really like Vipin to give you that 50,000 foot flyover of his background, because once you hear his background, you'll want to ask him questions and take advantage of the hour that we have with him. So Vipin, you could give us a quick introduction.
Hey, thanks, Valerie. And thanks, Matt, for having me here. I'm really excited with my partnership with Valerie and her team and really what we are trying to do in Shore. But briefly about me, I studied at Georgia Tech, as has been mentioned. I did my master's and PhD in AI at that time. It really was known more as black magic at that time, but nowadays it has gained ascendancy. I built and implemented several implementations while I was studying at Georgia Tech, working with my advisor, Dr. George Vaxavanos. And the interesting part was I worked in drones at that time, driverless cars. This is middle to early 90s. And so we were really at the cutting edge. And I think AI has been in space for a lot longer than people think. They think it's probably more recent. Finished my PhD and then joined GE in their R&D division and implemented a lot of implementations in medical systems, healthcare, aircraft engines, and power systems. That was fascinating, again, at the cutting edge of implementations for GE, and then moved over to Bank of America, and I was there for about 20 years working in their retail business as well as their wholesale business on the investment banking side, as well as in mortgages, and then moved over into risk management and was responsible or owned the AI implementations across Bank of America enterprise-wide. And so that is the experience we bring to the table, but also the consistency in our values and culture to really be partnered with the companies to build something that will sustain, that will really make an impactful difference in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm enjoying about working with Vipin, and I encourage anybody who wants to reach out and have a virtual coffee with him, even though I know he's slammed, the more you get to know him, the more intrigued you get about what the capabilities of AI are. So I'm going to take the first part of the presentation, but I did also want to note one of the things that I give a lot of credit to Vipin and his team is that in 2020, Shore Health, even though it was a young company, was recognized as a Final Four finalist for the Georgia Healthcare Innovation Challenge. So that was quite an accomplishment, I think, for such a young team. We decided that we'll let the revenue cycle person take a stab at going through talking about AI and RPA, because if I have spent this time and I can understand it, I think I want to practice sharing that message, but hopefully I can put it in a simplistic form that I've learned to be able to digest. I mentioned that in 2016, we started getting into AI and robotic process automation at Wyndham Brannan. And there really is a difference. There is a difference between AI and RPA. I read an article recently where they did a survey of healthcare providers, and 95% of healthcare providers indicated that they plan to have artificial intelligence in their revenue cycles by 2023, with 80% saying they already have artificial intelligence. When, as you listen to this presentation, I really want to challenge your thinking, because I would argue that probably 80% have RPA, but we've yet to really bring artificial intelligence into the revenue cycle. And before I jump into what the differences are, I wanted to make one statement, and then maybe I'll bring it back at the end is, we designed our revenue cycle processes over time. We started getting paid what we billed, then we got DRGs, then we got APCs, and then we had all these different changes. Would you build, at the end of this presentation, I want you to ask yourself, would you build your revenue cycle the same way that you have it today, knowing what you're going to know at the end of this? So that's going to be my question that I want to come back to is, if you had the opportunity to build it from scratch, would you still build it the same way with all these people doing all these processes? So to talk about AI and RPA, so what's the difference? AI and RPA are both two very powerful pieces of technology that can really transform any industry. It makes you more efficient, it reduces costs, it'll increase revenue capture. Other industries are light years ahead of us. Like Vipin said, this has been around a lot longer than we like to give it credit for. We just have not brought it into the business side of healthcare. RPA, robotic process automation, it really is those things that we can automate that are predictable and repetitive. Essentially, when it was explained to me, what's the difference between AI and RPA? RPA, if we're taking a human, RPA are our arms and legs. It is those things that make us able to do a task where we can pick up a pen and move it to the other side of the table. These are the things that can be performed the same time every way. Now, robotic process automation doesn't learn and it doesn't get smarter, and it can actually break and have humans go back in the background and have to fix it. So for instance, if we implement robotic process automation to go out into a payer system and pull back a piece of information, if for some reason that payer gets smarter than us and decides to move the location of that information, that RPA will break. Now, behind the scenes, a company will have humans who go in and then reprogram that RPA to work. So think of robotic process automation as this virtual assistant who's going to take off these repetitive and predictable tasks so that the humans can be more efficient. It uses structured inputs and logic. So, Vipin will be able to dive into a little bit more detail about this, but this is where there is structured and unstructured data. So RPA, it's our arms and it's our legs. Now, there are huge amounts of benefits to robotic process automation, and we're going to argue that both of them need to go together. I put an example up here of using the 276 and 277 transaction set where we're going out and querying a claim status and bringing that back in. This is a highly valuable task. Why is it very valuable? Because when we're getting these work lists for our staff every day, we really only want them touching what they need to touch when they need to touch it. So if we can offload this task of going out to a payer's portal, pulling back that next level code, putting it into our work queue system, and then rerouting it to the right person who needs to act on it, that's going to make our people more effective and take that non-value added task out of the system. It is designed to work in conjunction with people by automating that process. It does not replace the need for your human to do something to that account. So the benefits are it's going to improve accuracy and minimize human error. So instead of collector A having to go out to Blue Cross, get that information and put it back in, we've now taken that off their plate, put that into robotic process automation, minimize that we're not going to do that task, and then reroute it to the right person to work. Adherence to compliance. RPA is going to follow the rules precisely. And I want to emphasize precisely because this is where it can break. Robotic process automation requires us humans to still be the brains and make decisions for it. It's going to make us more effective and efficient. So it does complete tasks much faster than humans can do and works around the clock. So we can constantly be going out there and pulling back updated statuses to make sure that we're routing the claims to the right person. You will see improved employee satisfaction. I don't think any of us want to be doing those mundane tasks every day of going out to a pair portal and pulling back information and populating our systems. But that's a necessary part of what we do. So how is artificial intelligence different than robotic process automation? So I made that analogy that robotic process automation is equivalent to our arms and our legs. It still needs a brain to tell the arms and legs what to do. Artificial intelligence is intended to simulate human intelligent processes. It is designed to replace us and uses unstructured inputs, and it develops its own logic. And this is where I think we have not challenged ourselves enough as an industry to think about how we can apply artificial intelligence into our operations. Artificial intelligence processes include the ability to have learning, acquiring the information and the rules that are used, reasoning. Artificial intelligence is going to be able to make and reach conclusions and actually start telling us how we need to do business. And the adaptation and self-correction. Artificial intelligence learns and improves. One of the things I tell everybody is that, to me, as a business person, artificial intelligence is one of these few pieces of technology that actually appreciates in value because it does learn, it does get smarter, and it starts telling us how to work more efficiently and more effectively. And most information technology that we invest in depreciates, where this one actually gets smarter over time. I think the uses and benefits of AI are immense. While we said RPA is designed to work in conjunction with people by automating those repetitive tasks, AI is intended to replace your human labor. We use the term digital employee because it resonated with one of our clients back in 2016. When we started saying we're not trying to replace your EHR or your other systems that support your processes, we're trying to create the perfect digital employee that does the work the way you want, when you want it, how you want it, but also starts telling you what you need to be doing better. The benefits are immense. Reduction in human error. I think we all know and have accepted human error as part of our process. We have a lot of people putting, a peg from one place to another to make sure that we're doing it correctly. They're toggling between systems, and we've accepted that human error is just part of what we do. This will go away with artificial intelligence. You have digital assistants to interact with patients. I think all of us have had experiences of going on to another industry and having chat box features and interactions that we know are not with a human. You're going to have faster decisions, but better decisions. We're going to learn from the patterns, and they're going to start predicting possible failures. And that's where we want to be able to become informed and make better decisions on how we design business and where we put our efforts. So AI and RPA, from our perspective, are intended to work together because providers both have what we call structured data, which is going to be the data that is from the forms or the fields. And then you have unstructured data, and that could be free text notes. It could be scanned documents. It could be all sorts of things. And automating the revenue cycle requires the use of both RPA and AI. One of the things that I think sometimes we don't get enough credit for in the revenue cycle is that this is an extremely complex set of business processes. End-to-end automated revenue cycle is really only possible when you combine those robotic process automation and artificial intelligence techniques together so that we can transform our revenue cycle. So at this point, I'm going to ask Dr. Ramani to really try to educate all of us as to the different types of AI technology that's out there, applications, and then walk through a few examples, and let's try to connect the dots for us in healthcare so that we can start brainstorming about how we can use AI and RPA in our revenue cycle. So Vipin, I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, thanks, Valerie. So let me talk about some of these basic technologies. These are just illustrative. This is not a comprehensive list by any means, and I'll weave into some of the examples over the years that I have personally implemented. to illustrate how those can be applied and how those were, what are the pros and cons, what are the do's and don'ts in these implementations, and then we'll explore and think about and discuss extensibility to healthcare as well. So please feel free to send your questions as we go through this, but looking forward to more of a discussion with you guys. AI technologies, as I said, the very fundamental pillars of AI were sort of centered around fuzzy logic, neural networks, genetic algorithms, and the outcome was machine learning, deep learning, and basically what they were doing is trying to learn from the system itself as to what is the behavior that humans are trying to implement. Japan was at the forefront of implementations and fuzzy logic and took it very strongly. But the areas that have been applied using machine learning are fraud detection, remote diagnostics of machines if they break down. It's been implemented in aircraft engines when planes are flying to diagnose whether there was any engine failure that was imminent or predicting sort of a suboptimal operation. It can detect anomalies as well. So trying to see if there is an inconsistent behavior that this system or this operation has been trained and basically alert a co-pilot. It can identify rising risk in patients. So where you want to be more preventative and predictive in your patients, you can learn that if these combinations of factors happen, you can alert the physician or the caretaker and saying that this patient is at a higher risk so that preventative actions can be taken. Weighted Dempster-Schaeffer theory is basically around sensor fusion. As you can imagine, there are a lot of autonomous cars these days, Tesla being a prime example. They are using about 45 different sensors at last count, maybe even more by now, but what they're using is image recognition, sensors of sort of proximity sensors, other sensors, and they're trying to empower that experience as well as that drivability of that vehicle so that there is no accidents and the operation can be executed smoothly. There is a lot of redundancy that's built. This has been used in other areas as well, in aerospace, in space exploration, as well as very simple techniques in the industry as well, where they're trying to use information from multiple sources, multiple sensors, to reach a better conclusion, a more decisive, a more conclusive outcome. This helps in resolving conflicts as well, because if a singular sensor would give you, it might only give you one facet of information, which might by itself might lead you to a different conclusion. So it helps you resolve some conflicts as well. Clustering k-means, and there are other clustering techniques as well, which have evolved. They basically detect suspicious activity or basically identifying cohorts of behavior that are very different and consistent or inconsistent with other sort of normal behavior. It has been used in financial services quite extensively to basically identify fraudulent behavior because believe it or not, fraudulent behavior costs the financial industry, as in the healthcare industry and other industries as well. The costs are in billions of dollars. It has been used in terms of valuation as well, as to what is the accurate valuation of an asset, of a product. Digital twins is another more recent, I say recent, in the last decade or so, but basically it's been used in aerospace and oil and gas exploration, where what you're trying to do is you're trying to simulate human behavior and you're creating that model in a different place and you're mimicking that same behavior while the system is operating. So you are able to proactively sort of simulate how this machine should be working and how in a normal sense and how it is working currently. So what you can do is you can take actions and identify anomalies as well. Fuzzy ant colony optimization. I mean, this is again a technique that has been used for time series prediction, where you're trying to do is you're trying to build these colonies that the ants are really, what should I say, very adept at building and sort of driving towards a goal that they don't have any templates or goals to sort of build upon, but the ants have been doing a fantastic job in trying to build those. And so that's what this fuzzy ant colony optimization has been used. The social network link analytics, I mean, this is the more nascent area where basically what you're trying to do is trying to build a whole U, sort of a model to predict and to basically try to mimic your behavior, your trying to solve problems, trying to present the best products, and trying to present being out there to do it, sort of present to you the right options that you would like. So Facebook, Apple, Google, all these companies are using it, and many other companies are using it for a better experience to present to that personalized experience. Predictive maintenance, I mean, this is where a place that has been used, AI has been used extensively as well in terms of operational excellence, because what you're trying to drive is a human is operating a machine and they are proactively making sure that the systems are operating and are able to predict. So for example, it's been implemented and used in sort of X-ray machines, MRIs, in the healthcare space, where basically what you're trying to do is trying to make sure that the machines are 100% uptime, because you don't want to be in a situation where a mother brings her child in for a fracture, for a scan, but the machine is down. And so there is a lot of work that has been done to make sure that these machines are proactively sort of fixed, and there is a solution that is rendered that basically makes sure that 100% quote unquote uptime is achieved. Next page, let me talk about 3 or 4 examples from, these are just illustrative examples. There's a lot of work, other work that I've done. I've probably worked on more than 300 implementations of AI. So one of the accounting firms, what they wanted or what they needed was they had millions of documents that were in hard copies or digital contracts in digital format, maybe PDFs, maybe Excel, maybe Word documents, and so on and so forth. And they said, look, we are having to do it manually to extract this information as to the details of that contract. When does the contract expire? What is the sort of pricing on those contracts? What are the payment terms? And so on and so forth. And so what we were able to do is basically using basic optical character recognition, extracting those data sets, extracting truly features from those data sets so that they could become information. Using natural language processing, we were then able to train the model at a base level. And then basically using unsupervised learning, we were able to complete those millions of contracts in a very quick time frame. We use the concepts of inhibitors and enhancers. And what that does is basically it provides the co-pilot, if we need it, and assigned sort of performance review or performance document for each contract in terms of what was our confidence for that contract. Were we able to sort of identify all the features? How confident are we? And then if there are areas that we feel there is potentially erroneous data that needs to be addressed and fixed. So we use basically tokenization that helps us play that gamification of that information to make sure that data was extracted accurately. Now, in terms of extensibility, that can be extended to extract data from, I know in healthcare, there's provider administrative manuals that continuously keep evolving and changing over time. So how to extract that information, how to generate rules from that information, identify eligibility requirements, identify authorization requirements, and then being able to use that information to accurately sort of improve the process and also to reduce the deniability. So that's how to think about these implementations. There are several other extensions as well, but let me keep on moving because I think we're up against the time and I want to leave time for Q&A. The second one is, I briefly mentioned earlier as well, these are remote diagnostics where basically you could build these or be implemented remote diagnostics for power systems, train engines, transportation systems, medical machines, aircraft engines, where basically we could sort of identify the operating regime of an aircraft engine while it was taking off, while it was landing, and during flight. So what you could do is you could identify if the plane was being operated at the optimal level or if it was not. We were able to provide feedback to the pilot real time to basically take some maneuvers to basically be able to make sure to stabilize that. I worked on this quite a few decades ago, and within a period of 6 months during this implementation, we were able to alert the pilot twice, where there could have been we were able to predict a pretty significant issue where the pilots were able to land, because any unexpected landing or takeoff, which is not normal, typically landing, is cost about $1 million for these aircrafts. And so we could only do it in the most severe or most extreme cases, but we were able to alert the pilot and land. So there are some real uses that can be implemented in these cases. Same thing on medical machines. We were able to alert in many cases where the MRI machine or the CT machine were basically in a degraded performance, and the images would not have been clear. And we were able to inform the administrative staff to address and fix those machines so that the machines could operate at the optimal level. Again, more of the sort of implementation or the benefit of this was in terms of having to send an operator or a systems person to fix that machine. So it saved in expenses in terms of a human having to go and fix it. But it also sort of the bigger issue is the customer experience, the system performance improvement. And I think the extensibility to in the healthcare arena would be around improving the processes, improving the experiences of the patients and the systems, so that we can truly achieve that operational excellence that we're all sort of gunning for. In the third example, this is again from financial services. The next two examples are, this one specifically was around optimizing pricing. So for each of the MSAs, which are the metropolitan service areas, that's how pricing is done in the mortgage space, where basically you're competing in pricing mortgages, whether it's California, whether it's Georgia, whether it's New York. Pricing is different and it's customized and it's priced on a daily basis for all the different products. So we use machine learning, unsupervised learning, as well as neural networks and sort of backward propagation of how to correct errors. Because the goal or objective in this was to identify what would be the optimal pricing to pick up new accounts and incremental new mortgages on the increment. Because if you can imagine, right, if the pricing was too high, our profitability would be high, but the volume would decline. If the pricing was too low, we would get a lot of volume, but we would not get profitability. So the question was, how do we optimize our pricing to maximize profitability? The solution was built using neural networks. There was a concept of reinforcement learning because we would get daily feedback and daily data results to identify and understand as to how the customer behavior was changing, what was the demand elasticity in different regions. You can imagine trying to do that for 324 MSAs, which is the footprint in the US, and then trying to do a daily pricing. You would have to put an army of people trying to do that. So we automated all this where basically it was implemented. We were able to identify where the pricing was optimal, where the pricing was degraded, and was able to really maximize the benefits. The framework can be applied and extensible to the same way to healthcare, where we can identify and predict individuals' propensity to pay. We can inform the patient financial services so that we can optimize the financial strategies and really improved forecasting and financial planning for the institution at large. So that's really where this comes from. The last example that I'll go into details is this example of fraud detection and prevention, where we basically were using disparate information systems and data sources to identify fraudulent behavior. Because what is happening is, as the technology is becoming stronger, as we are getting more and more data, the fraudulent behavior is increasing as well. Like many of you would have these credit cards with chips in them. We thought that would help us prevent any fraudulent behavior, but guess what? There's a lot of fraudulent behavior using chips as well these days. And a lot of these banks individually, the top 4 banks, for example, their losses from just credit cards, for example, annually run about $1 billion. So you can imagine the kind of challenge the industry was facing. So we basically implemented solutions, the 2-factor authentication, using some AI, trying to connect different dots of data that we were receiving and getting to basically stay ahead of the fraudulent behavior so that the evolving threats could be mitigated. So we used some unsupervised learning algorithms to mitigate those financial losses. Additionally, providing that information to different areas and different places so that everybody was aware of it. Anti-money laundering, because and guess what happens? If you try to prevent them from using their credit cards, they'll try to use checks. If they can't use checks, they'll go into banking center, for example, try to use our lending operations. So there are a lot of things. So annually, we were able to save about $50 million in that implementation of AI. The extensibility to healthcare would be similar in terms of identifying and predicting write-offs, which are basically would help us become more efficient, become more financially stable in terms of improving our collections and recoveries. So again, some flavors, some examples. Let me now turn it back to Valerie to sort of walk us through AI and RPA and the revenue cycle.
Okay, before I jump into this particular slide where I've actually given an example of how AI and RPA could be used to take over a process, I kind of wanted to let you know how my brain thinks. Like, as Vipin is talking about these examples that have been used outside of healthcare, I think about that first example is now we have the ability to level set with the payers. If we can constantly be going out and getting updated payer rules, and informing our processes and our people about those changes, we will be level setting with them. It may take us, as revenue cycle leaders and someone who ran the revenue cycle for a large healthcare organization, it could be 3, 6, 12 months before we pick up on a pattern. If we can proactively identify changes and pick on patterns, we've just now made it harder for the payers to play those games with us. The second example, being able to predict system issues. I mean, it's funny, as a consultant, when I go in, sometimes the issue is the system is slow, and the system is slow because maybe we haven't purged tasks and it's starting to impact the performance of our people. So we see productivity not high, but not detrimentally low, but as a whole, it's really bad. These things can be out there to help us predict potential issues so that we can get ahead of them. The third example, when he was talking about fraud detection, I start going about, if I could take that type of technology and be able to better allocate how we do work. All of us are trying to maximize cash every month. All of us know that we're going to get Medicare dollars first, and we're going to need to work the managed care dollars. So we're all trying to plan out when and how we're touching these accounts. So if we can make sure that we're touching them when we should, that we're maximizing cash, I guarantee you that AI can tell us that better than any of us could do doing analytics on the tens of thousands of claims, if not hundreds of thousands of claims that are coming through our doors. And then the final example that Vipin covered, I started thinking about, we've got to start marrying up this data. You know, when I talk about unnecessary write-offs that aren't related to a contractual allowance, we've accepted revenue leakage as an unfortunate part of doing business in the revenue cycle. And we will write off accounts for one reason or another. Then we typically have a zero balance vendor who goes out there, reopens the claim. If we can start getting better and smarter, I hate to say this to all my friends who work in a zero balance firm, I'd love to put them out of business. Let's be able to figure out what we need to do when we need to do it. So taking that information so that we can do a better job of predicting when we might be writing something off too early, that we need to work it just a little bit more, or if we did this or did that, it would turn into a collection activity. Again, with respect to time, we have about 19 minutes. This is going to be a real quick example, and we actually did this with a client, of how AI and RPA can be used in the revenue cycle. So this is what we call the transform process. And this is focused in on prior authorization, and it was an epic example. So in our future state world, we envision that the physician is ordering, putting the order into Epic, he's documenting into notes, and that launches off a process where the artificial intelligence, and ours is called Trish, goes out and automatically checks the provider manuals to see if there's any changes to requirements, and if that particular procedure for that payer requires a prior authorization. If we see an issue with eligibility insurance, the system's going to go out there and relaunch and do it itself rather than kick it to a human process. It's going to go out there and go into, if a prior authorization is required, it will, the AI will go out into Availity and implement and input the data. If a piece of medical records is needed, and it can go into the Epic system, and with a 98% confidence level, grab the data that the payer is requesting, it can automatically submit that on the payer portal or within Availity. If not, it's going to kick it to a human for review, that we're not confident we have the pieces of medical record that are needed for this process, so it's going to now go to a human. But most of this process would be done through artificial intelligence. That's making sure that we've checked to see if a prior auth is required, making sure that the insurance is eligible, going out into whatever the system is to key in the information to initiate the prior auth, constantly be checking to see if we've got an approval, updating the system, documenting the records. If for some reason it is denied, the system for this particular situation, the provider would need to initiate the peer-to-peer and then notify some human that a peer-to-peer has been requested of the payer. So this is what we envisioned as a transformed prior authorization process to make sure that we were not having any administrative delays associated with prior authorization. The last few minutes, I want to talk about what you need to do to incorporate artificial intelligence into your revenue cycle strategy. So you see, I've got down their goal. It's about use cases. When you're doing artificial intelligence, you really have to do use cases and proof of concepts. I put the AI machine learning life cycle up there. I'm not going to read that to you. Step one, when you're doing this, is that I would not do this in isolation. This is not picking a solution for a problem. This is how are we going to transform our revenue cycle over the next 3 to 5 years. Remember, I asked that question of, if you could build it from scratch today with the technology you have at hand, would you build it the same way as you have it already in operations? And I would argue all of us would say no. We would definitely find these different places where we could automate with RPA and then transform with artificial intelligence. Getting a small but right task force together to figure out what are your short-term and long-term objectives. What are your barriers, whether those are internal or external barriers? And what are your goals? Everybody has different pain points. Now, the philosophy of us at Shore is that artificial intelligence is tailored. While 80% of all of us have similar challenges, 20% of what we do is going to be unique to our own provider environment. Yes, maybe it's an Epic shop, but there's going to be different systems that you use, different payers, different processes to engage with the payers. You're going to have a different culture and a different financial environment that's going to drive the way you do business. The way you've designed your work processes very much looks different than somebody else who might be on the same core system. So we call it a tailored AI approach, where we're really focusing in on how to make it work within your environment. So key after you've got your task force is to start identifying these initiatives that are currently causing you pain.
Hey,
Now, as you identify these different initiatives, I put over here our AI use case template and those different categories that you go through to ask yourself, is this a good use case for artificial intelligence? I would really tell you that it is my honest belief that anywhere from 60 to 80% of the tasks and activities that we perform in the revenue cycle can and should be automated with either RPA or AI. So after you've identified these, you start to prioritize. You cannot take on too much when it comes to AI. Identify that use case as your initial proof of concept that you can get live within 4 to 6 months. And Vipin, coming from his GE background, has hardwired in all of this is that you've got to get this proof of concept up and running as fast as possible. Technology is changing and the organization doesn't have time to wait. So we're really going to focus in on what are those things that are most impactful to the organization, whether that means that this use case can help accelerate cash, help improve net revenue, help adherence to compliance initiatives, or just make us more efficient. We're going to prioritize those against the complexity of building that in AI. And we're going to focus on those things that have the lower complexity and the highest impact. That's how you're going to want to prioritize. Now, I would argue that I would pick two and go at them. I call it kind of this dual flanked approach where you're coming at it from two ends. Pick a front end process and pick a back end process, and let's start to meet in the middle. What we've done here is we've highlighted those different sub processes where we would start. This is to not say that the others aren't ideal for AI transformation, but we want to start with those things that, one, we know cause people pain, and two, will be easier and quicker for you to build out that proof of concept. So when we're looking at the front end, everybody has issues with eligibility. The payers are constantly changing the rules around obtaining a referral. And oftentimes I see us actually get a prior auth, but we didn't get the referral, so game over. Prior authorization is always a moving target, and quite honestly, something that the majority of organizations struggle with and is a huge dissatisfier to our physicians and to our patients. I put appointment reminders in there because most health systems these days do own a large number of physician practices, and we've got to minimize downtime as much as we can. In the back end, I've looked at anything from edit management, the claim status and submission, payment posting, request for information process, even reconsideration, denials, and appeals can be moved to artificial intelligence. Your small balance process, your refunds, your credit balances, and then at the bottom, AI and RPA, you're going to get better reporting and analytics and better performance management. The tool, the AI, will start to tell you how to do business. So I wanted to put that snapshot up there of where we think the low-hanging fruit to transform processes are. One of the questions came through that I saw was like, well, what's the timeline and costs? I think the timeline and costs very much, and Vipin would probably agree with me, it depends upon the initiative, but we think you really should bite these things off in 4 to 6 month segments and start looking at this. And it becomes an iterative process that happens over several years. If we're talking about a true AI transformation of your revenue cycle, we're going to start in month 1, and hopefully by month 4, we're getting our first proof of concept in motion. Now, the things that I will tell you is that this is going to take a long time to transform. If anybody comes in and says they can plug in their solutions and it's going to happen, I would want to debate them because I don't think it's that easy. I think, we've got to make sure we've got clear use cases that are impactful to the organization and buy-in. Now, hopefully we can get those use cases and proof of concepts through the system, and by month 6, we're moving into production, we're monitoring it, and we're adding a new use case so that we can, start to transform the whole revenue cycle. So this at the highest level is a snapshot for us on what it would take to start to do an AI transformation. We think 2 years is really, if you're committed to fully transforming your revenue cycle, what we think it would be the minimum to take on all these different processes. I want to spend a few minutes and then, kick it over to some questions. I want to give a little advice on selecting a vendor partner. I put up here, this is a long journey, and selecting the right partner will make all the difference. As you go through this, I want you to really keep a few things in mind. We're going to learn some lessons from the banking industry, and I'll, kind of paraphrase some of the things that Vipin has shared with me. Just because they say they're AI doesn't mean they're AI. I think all of us are starting to learn that. That is the new phrase of the day. Everybody wants to say they're artificial intelligence. You need to really make sure that they are. When Vipin was in the banking industry, and all of a sudden people realized that there was a large amount of funding to be given to initiatives that were artificial intelligence, it went through the roof. And all these people all of a sudden had artificial intelligence, AI solutions. But when they really got under the hood, they found that less than 30% of those were really AI. They had just rebranded old technology. So make sure that you're really understanding, is this the right vendor for me? Are they really artificial intelligence, or are they just some old technology that they're calling AI today? Now, I put this one, is there a balance between theory and practical operational experience? A lot of times we get hung up on, the theory. We buy the bells and whistles and what it's capable of, but then when we go to implement it, we really don't see the benefit of it. That's because it wasn't practical. It didn't have an operator's mindset. So when you're looking through what their solution is, make sure that it really is practical and that you can see this coming to fruition over the years. I said again, know what's under the hood. How does their application work? Before we made the decision to partner with Vipin, we had talked to several other people out there who claimed they were AI. And at the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that a lot of them were just robotic process automation, predictive analytics, and there was still a lot of human involvement in the process. That's not AI. That's okay if that's what you want. If you want RPA, if you want predictive analytics, know that there's still human processes that have to happen either on the provider side or on the vendor side. And then finally, one of my suggestions, and I put my hat of being a former VP of revenue cycle, is, pick a vendor that is not just going to give you a solution for a singular process, but the opportunity to transform all process. It is not possible for you to have one AI vendor who handles your eligibility and prior auth, and another AI vendor who's handling your status checks and your reconsiderations. It will become not feasible for you to maintain that, and it will fail. You need to find a vendor that can handle whatever it is you want to transform, what your vision and what your goals are. So that's why we say start with what your goals are and what your pain points are. So don't just pick an application. Find a vendor that offers a flexible and collaborative business partnership. I said it's a long journey, and making sure that you have that collaborative process is going to be critical to actually realizing the benefits. I would hate to see anybody start to go down the path and engage with this and spend time and energy, and then at the end of the day, it didn't really help their process at all. Before we turn it over to questions, I wanted to say we do have a playbook that we've created for AI in the revenue cycle. If you are interested in getting a copy of our AI and revenue cycle playbook, just go ahead and email me. So that's my email up there. I think you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn too. But that being said, I'm going to pause and see if Matt, I only saw the one question come up while I was presenting, but I wanted to see if any more had come through.
Hey, Valerie. Yeah, so it looks like we had two that came through from the same person. So the first question is, for a provider looking to move to implementing AI, what does the timeline and cost of that process look like? I'll let you answer that one, and then there's one more question as well.
Sure. I mean, and Vipin, I want you to chime in on this. Timeline, I think I put up there, I think it's 24 months if you're going to fully transform your revenue cycle. Now, if you're talking about a use case, you should be looking to do something within 3 to 6 months. Do you agree with that, Vipin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every institution would be different. So there's not a cookie cutter solution
Yeah.
that you just come in and say, but we'll work with, we have partnered with different institutions, and on that journey, different institutions are at different levels. So
Yeah, and in terms of cost, I think that's a difficult one to answer in terms of what the expectation of cost is, because everybody's got such a different solution as a vendor. What I would be looking for is really building out that ROI and making sure that it has a positive ROI. So, I mean, that might be a little bit of a cop out, but until you really go, hey, what are the use cases? What are we looking to transform? It's kind of difficult to say the cost, but it absolutely should have a positive ROI where you're either getting cash acceleration, net revenue improvement, or FTE efficiencies where you can either redeploy those FTEs, upscale them, or make any other operational decisions that you need to with FTEs.
Perfect. And then the second question from the same person, in the AI RPA example for prior authorizations, would an implementation like that only require companies to need higher level skilled employees, like peer-to-peer review for denied auths?
Now, see, that was my vision. So as we implement AI in the prior authorization space, so let me walk through the actual problem and what the goal and the vision is for this particular organization. So in this particular organization, they had acquired hospitals and physician groups and not added any FTEs to their shared service center. So no matter how efficient we became with people, process, and technology, we just did not have enough humans to do the work. So we were constantly, I call it, killing ants one at a time. We're constantly stomping on the ants. And if we caught that we needed a peer-to-peer, it was getting bounced over to the physician who was highly dissatisfied as to why are we challenging this. As we were rolling out the automation, we did find that 60% of what we were doing with humans in prior auth could be put onto RPA and artificial intelligence. We were then upskilling, and the goal is to upskill the staff so that they can handle the peer-to-peer requests, and we can keep the physicians in their procedure rooms, because we want them revenue producing. When we're asking them to do a peer-to-peer, we're taking them out of procedure room. We're not only making them unhappy, we're losing revenue. So yes, the vision was to upskill the employees, possibly hiring, APPs ourselves or nurse practitioners so that they could do the peer-to-peers and prevent that from even going to the physician. So hopefully that answered the question in terms of the long-term vision when you're rolling out AI. And I think that varies. I think that's going to be very provider specific as to what works for you. But that's one of the visions that we have is let's make physicians, more productive in the procedure room. Let's make patients more happy because we didn't delay their procedure. And let's upskill our staff in prior authorization so we can handle these requests.
Perfect. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Vipin, as well. We sincerely appreciate your time and for sharing your expertise. That does answer all the questions that came through in the Q&A box, and we are right on time at the top of the hour.
I saw that. We got less than 1 minute. But I mean, first of all, Matt, thank you for coordinating this, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present.
Absolutely. So for those that are still on, just a reminder, I'll send out the slide deck and the recording link and the CPE form by Friday. So Valerie and Vipin, thank you very much again, and your expertise is greatly appreciated. And Valerie and team, thank you for your support of Georgia HFMA.
Thank you. Thanks, Vipin.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.